what I'm talking about is crack repair, and this piece here has occurred as the piece dried because I waited too long to turn it to prevent the crack from happening. And I also added a groove of a piece on the lathe, and so that's a more traditional inlay technique. But a lot of people have asked me how I do my own, and so that's what prompted me to try to do this demonstration. I want to mention many times you don't want cracks. Okay, if you have a utility piece, a piece you're using for salad bowl or cereal bowl that I do at home, you don't want a crack because the wood moves every time the bowl is washed. It absorbs moisture and then as it dries, so it's expanding and contracting. The wood's moving, but the filler material almost certainly will not move, and so the cracks will open up. What you really want to do is process the wood to avoid cracks in that case, and there's many ways to do that, many different things. One of the common ways that I do it is I leave the logs long and the ends check, but you cut off the checks right when I'm ready to start the work. The second thing is you have to remove the pith. The center of the piece is almost all black. And again, you can take advantage of that. Many of the pieces here I have left the pith in there because I didn't mind if it cracked. And you'll see one half of the piece cracked and the other half didn't. And I can't, so it's unpredictable, I guess, pith cracking. And then the standard method of preventing cracks in the is to do twice turning. You turn it when the wood is wet, you get most of the wood out of there, and then after it dries, it's turned oval, and then you could put it back on the lathe and turn it up to make it round and get to your final thickness. So those are the standard methods. And again, I mentioned here, I dry my pieces in paper grocery bags, which are still available from Giant Eagle for 10 cents each now. Yeah. But I've also tried fast drying in the microwave, and I'll have a story about that on one of these pieces. Again, there's other methods that I haven't used. Desiccant is a fascinating one. Ernie Conover and Dave Howard published a YouTube video about submersing a bowl in desiccant, those dry beads, those silica beads, and they say you can dry a bowl in about 2 or 3 days, okay, instead of 6 or 7 months. So it's fascinating. I haven't tried it. I don't know. I'm happy. I got plenty of bowls, so I don't need to do that. But it sounds like it's an interesting way to go. Now, on the pieces, again, cracks can enhance the beauty of the wood. So I've never really felt the need to prevent cracks in my pieces that are just for decoration. And that's what I'm going to show you today. And I also want to mention that cracks can be dangerous. They can, if you're not careful, or if you're in the line of fire, or if you're not wearing protection, you can get into trouble. The pieces can fly off the lathe. And high speeds are bad. Some of these pieces here, after I turn the outside shape, I'll wrap tape around the outside. That might not prevent a crack, but it'll prevent the piece from flying and embedding in the ceiling. All right, so what I'm going to talk about then is different inlay materials. And I forgot to mention Ken Newsom as a accomplished inlay person. If you saw his pieces at the Worcester show, saw some excellent work. But again, he was looking more at carving areas in his pieces and then filling them with various minerals. I'm looking more at crack repair. One of the first things I used, and I still use quite a bit, is coffee grounds. Dry, take them out of the coffee filter and save them, dry them out and use them. The trouble with coffee grounds is they tend to be coarse, and they don't fit into the fine cracks. And I can't get my coffee grinder to make them fine. You know, after a while, the coffee grinder gets it to a certain place and it doesn't get it any finer. So I found that I had to use this little mortar and pestle to grind the coffee grounds to fine dust. Sanding dust is my main go-to material now, and I want to distinguish sawdust is not sanding dust. Okay, sawdust is too coarse. You need sanding dust. You'll see I'll have 5 or 6 jars behind there. I used to segregate the wood into different jars. I had a walnut jar, a cherry jar, etc. Now I take whatever I get, and I keep walnut separate because it's very dark. But the cherry and the maple and who knows what else, I keep it in one jar. And the primary reason is where I get my sanding dust from. It's from those little bags that are attached to the back of your orbital sander, as an example. You can get about a 6-month supply from one bag. Some of you, it depends on what kind of dust collector you have. You might be able to collect the dust from your dust collector too. But sometimes If I need some walnut and I want it, I'll just take a piece and I'll grind the hell out of it and collect the sawdust just for that job. I did do quite a bit of work with powdered metal. I've tried copper and pewter, and I bought that from this guy, Ted Sokolowski, which is a guy in Pittsburgh, a pro turner. I'd love to have him into our club one day, but he doesn't do as many demonstrations as he used to. Turner Select is a brand name that you can get off the web. Craft Supply sells that. They're much cheaper than Sokolowski, and I bought copper and aluminum. Pewter is my favorite color, and aluminum is a cheap alternative to pewter, and it looks almost the same. And then, of course, brass key shavings that you can get for free from Home Depot. And I have a jar of that if you want to try that today. Now, the next group is Inlay, is a resin type of material, and it's easier to sand than real stone. I use a lot of turquoise colored Inlay instead of turquoise, just because of the ease of sanding, and it looks almost as good, not quite. And the standard Inlay comes embedded in a resin already, and you just sort of pour it into the cracks. I don't like that as much because it's very, very fine. It's like each particle is like a grain of sand or even smaller, but it's not really pop. So I buy the nuggets, and I'll show you those in a minute. Okay, and I do buy some turquoise. You can get a lot of man-made turquoise stone or natural turquoise stone. And I bought a necklace off of eBay for maybe $10, and I chopped up the beads, and I still have that. It's probably 8 years old. I don't use it as much because I switched to the Inlays. But if you look at it close, you can see the colors are a little bit more vibrant. All right, so Inlay Standard versus Inlay Nuggets. You can see the difference in size. I will take the nuggets and I will crush that a little bit to get something a little bit finer, but much coarser than the standard. Man-made turquoise looks a lot similar to natural turquoise. Natural turquoise tends to have browns, brown colors interspersed, brown veins through the turquoise, and that's fine too. And you could buy it pre-crushed, or you could buy the necklaces. It's not really that big of a deal to buy the crushed. I just look at they sell like an ounce for like $15, and it just against my principles to spend that much money for a handful of stuff. The other thing I've just experimented with is mica powder. And I bought 2 little jars for a couple bucks each at the last symposium. I have a red and a blue. They've got some shininess in them from the mica. And I've been told, I read on the internet, that mica powder is the main thing that they use for eyeshadow. And you can go to Big Lots or dollar store and you can buy like 10 different colors for $1. And it's probably just as good. And it's kind of fascinating, so you might want to try that. Experiment with that. And sometimes you could just use plain glue. You don't need to put a filler in. I usually use fillers for the colors and also to consume space. If epoxy is very expensive or CA glue, you don't want to be filling gaps with just the glue by itself. And so the filler just extends the efficiency of using up the epoxy. But you don't have to. And you could add dyes or colorants to the epoxy or the CA glue and get what you want. Others that I have not used but I'm ready to try, I bought a little jar of crushed abalone and a little jar of man-made opal at the symposium. Very, very cool with the shimmering colors of both of those materials. And I'm just looking for a special piece to stick that in. Other things I have not used. Baking soda is very fine. It takes colors extremely, as being white, the colors that you add to it will be very true. For example, if you add red to a cherry sawdust, you're going to get a brownish red. You're not going to get red. If you add red to baking soda, it'll be red. Eggshells, crushed eggshells. Many other minerals are used. Calcite, malachite, who knows, coral. Red coral is another one. So I haven't used those. Ken has used those to my knowledge, I think so. Coffee beans, walnut shells, some things that are coarser. I've even seen people use avocado rinds and big, large avocado things, and they're like embedded in epoxy, and they look like pear shapes when you cut through it. It's really weird. So anyways, plastic beads and metal wire are also, you can find examples of that. Now I want to switch to the glues. The first glue, the one that I use the most is CA glue, cyanoacrylate glue. There's 3 price ranges. There's the budget stuff that you can buy at Mark's for 25 cents a tube. I quit using those and I switched to the premium. This is my own terminology, premium. It's like $8 for a 2-ounce bottle. Those are the ones you find at craft supplies or many other places. And there's some examples of the brands there: Instabond, Starbond, Stickfast is the one that Dave Hout promotes. And then there's something that I'm calling Premium Plus, which is double the price. And the only 2 I know of there is Glue Boost and Parfix. Glue Boost is doing lots and lots of advertising on their product, and apparently they claim non-blushing. Some of these glues, if you spray it with the accelerator, it'll blush. Instead of being crystal clear, it'll be cloudy. So they like to push that. Parfix pushes this medical grade as their claim to fame. It doesn't smell. The fumes of CA glue can be quite objectionable. And you can actually develop an allergy to it if you're not careful. Parfix I like a lot for that. And I'm probably going to buy more Parfix because I've been experimenting with these, and so far, once I run out of my supply of existing glues, I might go for that. The other thing, you can buy CA glue in 3 thicknesses: thin, medium, and thick. I usually use thin and medium. And I buy, every now and then I'll buy a black. Most often, you don't need an accelerator. You can put the glue in there and wait overnight, or wait some undefined amount of time and check to see if it's cured. Or you could squirt it with the accelerator and you could start working 5 minutes from now. The third one is resins. Really, a lot of people mistakenly call all resins epoxies, but really there's 2 different kinds of main kinds of resins. One is polyester resin, and the other is true epoxy resins. The polyester resin is what is in the Inlay product, and also you go to Michael's craft store and you find a casting resin. The picture there on the left, on my left, is of a jar of that from Michael's. And then the epoxy resin, the most famous one is called West Systems, and there's System 3, which is almost the same in terms of prominence in the market. And Raka, R-A-K-A, is the one that I bought because it's a little bit cheaper. The way I tell them apart is the epoxies, you mix them roughly 1-to-1, the hardener and the epoxy together to get your material that will harden. And in the polyesters, you just put a few drops per ounce of resin. So that's how you tell. I think they're both usable. I really haven't used too much of these. And the way you see a lot in the YouTube videos is they're making very large tables or something like that, and they fill in huge voids, maybe 3, 4, 5 inches wide. But I do use epoxy, but I don't use it much because I'm not patient enough to allow the material to harden. And the third one is standard white glue, wood glue. PVA, it's called, polyvinyl acetate. And I use Elmer's and Titebond, and I'll show you examples of that. So how do you choose a glue? Well, the good things about CA glue is the thin CA glue is very good with fine powders. And I'll show examples of how I work with that. And thin is also good for stabilizing punky wood. And you see a lot of wood I have is punky. Medium and thick are more gap filling. And again, I use the black CA on occasion for direct filling of a crack without the need for any fillers. CA glue is very fast, especially with an accelerator. And I'm going to show accelerations today. I tried to get put a few drops of glue onto a piece of wood and squirted it with accelerator to try to get it to blush. I was 0 for 3. So I don't know. It does happen, but it's unpredictable. I can't say when it doesn't happen. But anyways, and fumes can be an issue. And the second biggest issue with CA glue is it can stain the wood. If you don't do it right, fully prepare it, sand it, and polish it and everything, and you'll see this little halo around the crack, and you know that something's been done there. And it drives me crazy. So what you need to do is you need to put 1 or 2 layers of finish on the wood before you start this. Sanding sealer, regular finish. Or the other thing is you could use CA glue as your top coat finish. You can do the whole piece in CA glue. And I'm starting to try a few examples of that. And it's not bad. It works pretty good. The other thing about CA glue, it's harder than epoxy, and it's a little bit harder to sand because of that. Resins, they're easier to stand. They have longer working times in general. The way I have typically mixed up like the 5-minute epoxy and the 10-minute epoxy, it's very much viscous. It's more viscous. It's almost like a peanut butter in consistency, and it won't flow down into the cracks. West systems and the Inlays, it's a little bit more able to penetrate a crack. And you can heat up your piece. Sometimes I've been told that you can get hot water and after you've mixed the epoxy in your beaker, stick that into hot water to warm it up. That'll make it a little bit thinner. It can penetrate the cracks. The disadvantage is you have to wait overnight for total cure before you do anything, or that's my practice. The advantage is the epoxy can move with the wood a little bit. Some of my pieces, 2 years later, maybe they didn't fully dry, and when they dried, the cracks opened up again. The epoxy would not open up a crack, but a CA glue crack might reopen. You have to repair it again. But because it's a little bit softer, sometimes it'll creep a little bit, and you get a little bit of a bump after a year. And the biggest issue with that is it can be a nightmare of a mess if you are trying to fill a crack on a rounded piece, and maybe you put tape on the sides to hold it in, and the tape fails. Oh, don't ask me how I know about that. Now, PVA glue, the white glue, the Elmer's glue. Hardly anyone uses that, but I've been experimenting with it, and I think it's pretty cool, and I would recommend you do the same. It's the least expensive, and it's the least toxic. I mean, you get it on your hands. I mean, I wouldn't eat it, but I mean, it's really not that bad. And I've used it for punky wood and for larger voids. And again, I wait at least overnight, sometimes even thicker. And I'll show you some examples of that today. Sometimes it doesn't always sand as smooth. And that's because I'm still experimenting with my mixers. I'm not that scientific about how I mix these. I just pour some into a cup and mix in some glue, and it looks right. I'll add a little paint to make it red, and I'll go for it. It's not like I'm controlling how much glue per sawdust ratio or something like that. And I'll show you, I use sometimes a peanut butter-like consistency, and sometimes I go to more like a maple syrup consistency, or even a little bit more, not quite to water. All right, then I frequently use colorants, dyes. Again, remember, dyes are transparent and pigments are not. So you have the choice. You can use either one depending on what you're going for. The dyes, they're called the best dyes. The most fade resistant are what are called metal complex dyes, as opposed to the more common aniline dyes. Okay, so TransTint is the common brand that you find at Craft Supply, and the new one on the market is ChromaCraft, and those are more color fast. If you leave your piece in the sunlight, it'll still be red. It won't be a dull brown after a month or so. I have added dyes to epoxy, PVA glue, and directly to the wood dust. And I've also used leather dyes, especially for black. Everyone seems to like this black dye, that's shoe leather dye for black, as opposed to the TransTint, which might turn a little bit bluish, apparently. Okay, and then paint. I use acrylic water-based paints all the time. And you can buy pigments that are used with manufactured with the same manufacturer as the epoxies, and they be compatible with that. Choose a compatible dye. So these are acrylics and dyes. Dyes are on my left, TransTint and ChromaCraft. The rest are acrylics. I use mostly the craft store bottles. They're like $1 a bottle at most. Golden is one of the 2 or 3 brands that are considered professional grade. There's probably $6 for the same size bottle, and you can see the different things there, different options. I usually, again, use the cheaper stuff. Other things you need, mixing cups. I use Dixie cups, and I also have special medicine type cups that have the gradations on the side, so it's easier to mix the epoxy in those things. You need a lot of popsicle sticks, a lot of protective gloves, and a way to crush rock. And I'm showing the most common one, which is you buy a pipe and you put a cap on it, and you find another pipe that fits on the inside. You put a little rock in there, and you bang it a few times and it turns into powder. And you do light taps and you'll get a small amount of pulverization, and the harder you hit it, the more pulverizing is happening. So that's very common. The other thing I use, magnifier headband, a lot of sandpaper, and a lot of patience. Okay, again, some other things before I go to the demonstration. Dry wood is best. Okay, if you do wet wood, the wood is going to move, and then you might have to redo it. Okay, you can take actually a turning blank and fill the cracks before you start, and maybe that gives you some degree of comfort that the wood won't fall apart while you're cutting it. But again, you're going to be wasting a lot of epoxy because most of it's going to turn into shaving. And again, you can also buy flexible CA, it's called it. It's got some rubber in it, and all three of those help with the moving of the wood. But it's better to use dry wood. I'm going to show you an example where if you have the CA glue or any type of glue that forms a little bead above the crack, you have to get rid of that by sanding. I'm going to show you scraping that first will prevent some rounding of the sanding of the wood surface, because again, maybe the CA glue is harder than the wood and you can get gouging with the sandpaper if you're not careful. And I'm going to show you another technique. Wet sanding. I do a lot of wet sanding also. The epoxy especially gums up the sandpaper. You got to throw it away fast. But if you wet sand with walnut oil, my favorite, the walnut oil sort of carries that epoxy away and allows the sandpaper to last longer. And sanding before the CA has cured. I'm going to show an example of that as a way of very quickly fill a crack as you're sanding. All right, and I want to mention there's many other ways to repair a crack. There's a very excellent article in the AAW magazine a few years back. Those are 3 different examples. The butterflies are shapes, or bow ties are sometimes called. Those are wood inlays. You route the shape out and repair the crack that way. The lower left, those are called stitches. And then the third one on the left, that's actual stitching. That's leather thread. Okay, I'm going to start with turquoise. That's my favorite. All right, this is Len Widmer's piece. This is Inlay, and it's the standard. The particles in this turquoise are very, very fine, and it really looks like a continuous color, more or less. So it's very nicely done, but I prefer to see individual chunks like that, right here. So those are individual chunks. I put them in one by one with the tweezers. This was a crack. These were tiny cracks. And anyways, I like that effect. Third piece, again, the option of making an inlaid groove and putting turquoise chips in there, the inlay nuggets in there, I think looks quite nice. Okay, so this piece here, very nice base shape. This piece here, one large fragment came flying off. So I put it back in, I glued it together, and I opened the groove with a Dremel tool, and I filled it with black paint. Also, this whole thing has a sealant on it. It's one layer of lacquer-based sanding sealer. And then I filled this with inlay chunks from here to here. They're relatively finer chunks, and I put them in with a little spatula. But up here, especially as it curves around, I was putting them in one by one with the tweezers. So I'll just show you how I do that. First, this is man-made turquoise necklace pieces, crushed a little bit and crushed a lot. I've got inlay nuggets here, and these nuggets crushed to a little bit finer. And that's what I'm going to use today. My glue, I'm going to use medium viscosity. The other thing is I like to put these inside a tray because a lot of this will spill, and I like to collect it out of the tray and put it back in into the buckets. I let it dry for roughly 2 weeks. Because the wall thickness is 1/4 of an inch or less, it dried within 2 weeks. Went from very wet wood to very dry wood. Then I use CA glue, thin or medium, probably some of each. Now I don't like to get glue on my spatula, so I'll use popsicle stick, sort of force it in. All right, that's it. As we say at NASA, it's not rocket surgery. Sometimes here, I don't have enough glue here at the end. If I put the CA glue directly there, it'll sort of creep down and sweep the pieces away. So I might take some thin CA just to hold it in place. Now, I don't know if you could tell, but the thin CA went all the way down that crack. The one option, if you don't have accelerator, is you're done. You just wait, and then when it's dry, you sand it. And after you sand it, you will see there's gaps, holes that you have to fill with another layer of CA, or you add some more chips, or you use an accelerator. This is the Instant Bond accelerator, and this is the one that's supposed to be non-blushing, glue boost, so I'm going to try that. While I let that dry, CA glue can bond to a paint. The paint is very thin. It's black acrylic paint, one of these jars here, and frequently diluted. All right, and so you don't need a lot, but I think turquoise on cream-colored wood is good, but it's not great. You add the black to it, it's great. Now, also, by the way, after it was dried, it was sanded. I have marked on here so I don't forget how far I've sanded to. This is to 120 grit. After I've fully done everything, I'm sure I'm going to at least 400 grit, maybe 800 or 1,000. To sand off these things, I use 120 usually. Sometimes, if it's just a minor thing, I might start with 240. This is 120 grit on here now. This is already hard. Oh, a little bit not yet. So I'm going to sand this part here to show you what that looks like. Breaking one of my own rules of not using dust protection. Whether I'm set up at home, I'm wearing a dust mask, a face shield with a little fan blower on it, and I also have my dust collector with a big hose coming right to here and sucking up the wood dust. I don't know if you can see here, this is bare wood. This is epoxy or the turquoise mixture, which is still a hump. You can feel it. It's still very proud of the surface. Here, there's a gap, and it's filled with sawdust. Here. So you have the choice of blowing that or sealing that directly with thin CA glue, or blowing it out and sticking a chunk of turquoise right there. I'm going to sand this off a little bit more. Now, many times, I'll be doing this wet sanding with walnut oil at this point. No dust at all, and you're not gumming up the sandpaper. The reason I'm not doing it, because this wood has a lot of curl in it, and I want to experiment with it. I don't want the oil to interfere with any dyes that I'm going to be adding later. So, if I look at it closely, quite a bit of the turquoise chips are gone, and it's mostly like isolated chips in a black river here. And I'll probably take my Dremel and drill out some places to put individual chunks to enhance the amount of turquoise in there. Glue Boost sells a special paper that you could put across here that is sort of like a sanding mask that allows you to not get any type of gouging or anything. But if you run your finger over this, you're not going to see any problem with this. And that was 120 grit, 2 minutes. You do a little 240 on top of that, it'll be perfect. But I'm not going to do that now because I want to put a few more chunks in here. To do that, first I've got to put some lacquer back on here because this is bare wood and I don't want to stain. If I was at home, I'd put some lacquer here, stop, and then I'd add some more turquoise. Now if you look up here, there's larger chunks here. And this is going to look good. I haven't fully sanded it, so I'll do a little bit more sanding here to expose that to show you what that looks like. Yeah, okay. This is lacquer. Gloss, clear, deft. It's hard to find deft these days, so I buy Minwax. Okay. So you see, in my mind, there's too much black, not enough turquoise from here to here. But this part here looks pretty good. That's almost, I'm happy with that. I would probably have to do some of this by hand with a file to get into the nooks and crannies there on the neck. So you can see I'm going to put turquoise in these two black things. I'm going to take this crack all the way around and fill it the rest of the way. Do the same thing here. That's it on turquoise. I guess I'm going to do sanding dust next, sawdust next. Okay, with CA glue. All right, these two pieces here. This is the same sycamore. It's spalted, punky. The end grain absorbs the finish better, differently than the side grain, and the spalted wood absorbs the wipe-on poly different from here. So I'm going to pass these around at risk because you'll see that this finish is not as nice as I usually do. I have to still work on it, but I want to show you the difference. Here, notice this pith did not crack at all. This pith did. And because you have these black spalting lines in here, black is the perfect choice here in my mind to complement that. It almost looks like the spalting has gone from the sapwood to the heartwood here. So to me, that's a very attractive way of going. This is another piece from the same log of sycamore. Again, the finish isn't quite right yet, so I'm going to keep on working on it. But here, both piths cracked, and I filled it with mica powder. If you look at these, there's some shimmering in this mica, and it's kind of nifty. All right, so that one crack filled with sanding dust, one crack filled with mica powder. I will fill this one here with sanding dust. This is a very large void here. This is the same sycamore that's being passed around. You can see the sapwood here, the heartwood here. You can see all these fine cracks here, very thin. These are the ones I'm going to fill with sanding dust. So I want black. Even if you use cherry wood or any other type of sawdust, after you put the CA glue in it, it's going to be pretty damn dark. But walnut will be black after you mix it with the CA. And this is coffee grounds where I made it super fine using the mortar and pestle. After I'm done, you'll be able to contrast the difference of this stuff with the regular grounds out of my grinder. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some walnut. Again, this piece has been sealed with lacquer-based sanding sealer, 1 or 2 coats. Probably I should have done more because this is end grain and it's sucking up the finish quite a bit compared to this. But I'm willing to take a chance. I use wipe-on poly as a sanding sealer, and I use lacquer as a sanding sealer, both regular lacquer and lacquer-based sanding sealer. I haven't decided if I'm going to do wet sanding or not, but it'll get several more coatings of, several more layers of sanding. So most of the lacquer is going to be gone before I add the wipe-on poly. Anything can go over lacquer, but sometimes lacquer does not go over other things. I've had good luck with wipe-on poly over lacquer and vice versa. But usually, once you choose one, you stick with it, and you don't have to do that. I have used water-based sealer. I restrict water-based poly and water-based sealer to punky wood that's spalted, because the black lines against the white background is what I'm going for. If you use an oil-based thing, it'll be more yellowish background, and I'm not that thrilled with that. Okay. Okay, so I filled several of these cracks. I can still see them, even though you might not be able to. And I'm leaving some extra sawdust on top, because once you put the CA glue on there, it's going to wash some of it away. It's going to push some down and just consolidate it, because this is like loose powder rather than consolidated powder. And if I was doing this, and if I was had a perfect memory, I would have had those little, the CA glue comes with those little nozzles that you put on top that they're flexible, so you get a very fine flow of the super glue out of the thing, much finer than this. This is probably a 1/32 inch diameter nozzle. I use those little inserts you put on top are like human hair thickness. And you see, I'm using my fingers to push things around sometimes. Can't really. If you do that without gloves on, I'm not here to help. All right. So now, before it's, CA glue usually hardens quite fast. I'm shoving more of that in there. Adding a little bit more on top. And pretty soon there's going to be a big buildup of sawdust that's solidified with CA glue onto the popsicle stick. You've got to throw it away. That's ready for, it's a little bit wet. I could spray it with accelerator, but my experience says that the thin CA is going to be solid before you know it. I'm going to switch to this side, black CA. Feel a crack. And again, I'll force it in there by rubbing. This is Instabond, mail order. Everyone sells it. Yeah. It says black flexible. So you can get clear flexible, black flexible, and brown flexible. And I'm a little bit reluctant to keep too much of the CA onto this. I don't want it to soak in on the end grain, so I'll probably just wipe it off. Just let it soak in. Now, I could already tell I'm going to need more than one coat because it's soaked into and this crack is probably through thickness. I'll just wait till it dries, spray it with accelerator, put another layer on. I could put clear on top of black. It's still going to look black because you got the black layer inside. When I'm at home, I usually leave the caps off. I seem to have better luck that way. And but I don't do that with a glue boost just because they said keep it on. And I have this. This is a pin vise. I put a sewing needle in there, and you can open up the bottle very quickly. All right, so now I've got the medium CA on top of the black CA. Both of them, the black is medium also, but it's gap filling, but it's not. It's still going to require more than one layer. So if I was really doing this a lot, put the accelerator on, go back to this side. This is dry. Oh boy. The fumes, the CA fumes were like, whoa, coming up like crazy. See how far I've gotten? This is bare wood. This is sealed wood. This is the crack. It's got a lot of stuff on top. This crack is fully sanded. No CA bumps or anything. This one's still got a lot to go. Now, this specific piece of wood is vaulted, so there's like yellow and whites and browns mixed in, and it's probably, the CA staining won't be as noticeable, but it's my practice. I'm going to stick with it to seal it all the time. All right, so this piece here, this crack from here and this crack here is fully sealed, fully filled with black CA and or walnut powder. From here to here is a white crack. It's white because it was not filled with anything and it's now filled with sawdust. Okay. This crack here it's still got CA on top, so it's not fully sanded. I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to put just a little bit of thin CA in this one crack. Wipe it off. I took a chance there. I wasn't paying attention, and I should have put the sealant on first. But all right, you'll see that it's not fully filled. I'll put some. Okay, lacquer on it again. So now it looks pretty good. When you rub your finger on it, it's not going to be fully smooth, but you'll see it's filled, and you'll see the contrast with the work that's not fully sanded yet. So this is ready to pass around. Now this is lacquer, and it's also been thinned. The lacquer comes out of the can almost like maple syrup. This is much thinner, more like water. I thin it with lacquer thinner. Okay, so when I pass this around, this side is sawdust. This side is black CA, and some of these are unfilled, so you can see the difference. Okay, I'm going to switch to metal inlay now. Examples. This one here, I carved this pattern in with a Dremel tool, and then I did black dye everywhere. Again, I want to emphasize, not all cracks need to be filled. Okay, this one here, it's kind of a nice little bowl. It's from a burl, and it's got this big void here with bark on it. I think it looks good just the way it is, and I'm not going to fill that. Okay. However, this one here is from the same piece of wood, and it's more like crack-like cracks rather than a large circular void. And this one here, I put in metal, aluminum metal, and this is aluminum metal, and I think it came out very good. I'd give this an A or an A+, one of my favorite pieces. And even the little tiny one here, I got metal dust in. So this one is, again, a desire to enhance already special piece of wood with some metal dust. This one here, the third piece from the same burl, and this crack here, I think is a prime candidate for the metal dust. So that's what I'm going to do. Again, I use copper and copper a lot, but silver is my favorite because copper contrasts with the wood is cool, but it's not great. I mean, it's kind of subtle. And take some of this metal powder, and I'll just flood it in here. Do the same as the thin CA. Flood that. That works for thinner cracks quite a bit. Thin CA. Now, when you sand this, you'll notice it right away that you're not sanding plastic anymore, you're sanding metal. Okay, you see the stuff penetrated quite deeply in some of these things, and you see several iterations will be needed to fill this up. Not even waiting for the prior layer to cure, I'm just sticking it on there. All right, that's pretty good. Gonna need. I could tell. My experience with the metal dust is you have to sand and reapply 3-4 times to get it smooth. And here's the second way of going. You'll take medium CA, putting a big glob on your, and you're going to pre-mix it. This is how I did the mica powder also. I pre-mixed it, and then I applied it. Sometimes the aluminum powder will accelerate the curing, and it will be cured before you want it to. Other times, you have to let it sit for hours, and other times you'll use an accelerator. The paste, it's medium CA with the same dust. All right. So you don't want to stick the CA glue into the stick, so I'll turn it around. I'll add a little bit more up here. Thin CA on top. Take the stick, and I can see this hole here, so I'm going to shove as much in there as I can before it solidifies. All right, so this stuff here is already the thin CA is pretty solidified. This thick, or the medium, still flowing. And when it's already gone deep in the cracks, it's going to look good. I'm going to spray it just so I can show you. This one I sealed with wipe-on poly, so I don't want to put the lacquer on this one. This is bare wood here. This is the bark inclusion with the metal almost fully sanded. This is with the much more close to fully sanded, and you see here unsanded here. So you could compare then contrast the various stages of finishing this crack. Again, brass key shavings I've used. Brass key shavings by themselves or mixed with coffee grounds, very nice effect. Don't use iron, because iron will rust, screw it up. Okay, this piece here, this is box elder. It was bleached a little bit to get it more white. And you know box elder has a lot of reds in it. So I used red filler. So this is Elmer's glue mixed with sawdust and red paint. And these cracks, when I pass it around, I think the effect turned out pretty good. So one of my first attempts at red paint. Mongrel mixture of sawdust. This is some Tite Bond, yellow Tite Bond, diluted with water. Okay, now it's like peanut butter. Pretty good. I'll add some black paint, acrylic paint, water-based paint. It's water-based glue, water-based paint. That also has the effect of adding water to the mixture, so it's no longer like peanut butter, but it's not quite syrup yet. Okay, now it's very soupy. Very soupy. And you could put it in here like that. And you can rely on the soupiness to let the stuff penetrate it deep into the crack. And this technique is so neat, I want to show you this. There's some cracks here. So what I'm going to do, these are empty cracks. I'm going to just sand it. Okay, now it's got sawdust in that crack. And now it's got CA on top of that. And then I'm going to flood the whole thing like this. And then I'm going to sand the wet CA. But all these cracks are sealed, they're filled, and they look like natural part of the wood. Looks pretty cool. And again, wet sanding with CA glue is what you're doing. The only disadvantage to this is this is already clogged up and you can't even use it anymore. But the cracks are ready to go. It's fully dry, it's everything, it's perfect.